Everybody, welcome back to Weather on the Go, all your weather coverage. In today's video, we'll be focusing on rounds of severe storms and walking you through the next 7 days as extreme heat builds across North America. And we'll be talking about a full tropical weather update later on in today's video. But right now, you see a round of severe weather is expected today in a couple of areas. We have a slight risk back here across portions of central Nebraska near the North Platte region, down toward the Goodland, Kansas region into northwest Kansas. But our main area of concern today is across the southern Great Lakes, where you see in the orange outlined area, that's a level 3 out of 5. That's an enhanced risk of severe weather across portions of southern lower Michigan, northeastern Indiana, into northwest Ohio. So Detroit, over to Grand Rapids, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Toledo, Ohio are in the area of concern today for severe storms. And this morning, we've already seen a line of thunderstorms pretty strong across north central Illinois, getting into southern and southeast Wisconsin. Already storm spotters confirming 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts near the Illinois-Wisconsin state line this morning, with tree damage and also branches down as well. And so far, the Storm Prediction Center storm reports today have 3 reported wind reports across portions of southeastern Minnesota and into southern Wisconsin and far northern Illinois with that MCS as it moves across this region. And as it moves to the east, it will be intensifying. So the severe weather threat will be starting to ratchet up as it moves across portions of southern lower Michigan, getting into northern Indiana and northwest Ohio, with the damaging wind gusts over 60 miles per hour expected later on today. We do have a threat for tornadoes, especially in the green and brown areas, especially near Detroit, Toledo, Fort Wayne, and near portions there of the Kalamazoo region. We could be seeing a few tornadoes later on today, and then a secondary threat for quarter size to half dollar size hail perhaps across this region later on this afternoon. So let's walk you through the timing here. This morning, we're seeing a loosely organized MCS move across Wisconsin and northern Illinois. This will cross over southern Lake Michigan into northwest Indiana by late this morning. And by the afternoon, this will get a little bit more organized, peak daytime heating, and we'll see a lot more of those CAPE values surging well past 2,000 joules per kilogram. So that will support a widespread wind damage threat with tornadoes and also the threat for large hail as well across southern lower Michigan into northern Indiana, northeastern Indiana, and into northwest Ohio this afternoon. And then that will press into portions of Lake Erie and in northeastern Ohio into portions of New England overnight tonight and into your Thursday morning. But the big story of the week will be the heat. You see the heat headlines really expanding in real estate across the United States here going through this morning. In the areas in orange, those are heat advisories, and we see that across much of the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and down into the southern plains, and even parts of the I-95 corridor as well, up here from Boston down through New York City and into southeastern PA. Those are heat advisories here as well. So that's something to contend with through the week. And the reason for that, yeah, it's the ridge of high pressure today, and that's centered across the Four Corners region and nudging its way eastward into the western high plains this afternoon. And then as we go into late week, the high pressure from the western Atlantic will connect forces with the high pressure across the Four Corners region and just have one big massive heat wave across the southern and southeastern states. And then the northern areas across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and Northeast will be on the northern periphery of that with the active storm track. So looking at the high temperatures today, it's going to be hot, folks. Make sure to stay hydrated. If you have an air-conditioned room or anything like that, if you're working outdoors, please use shade to your advantage. Use air-conditioned room. Use water to your advantage to stay hydrated because it's hot out here. Temperatures are into the 90s and low 100s. It will be hard-pressed to get under 100 degrees into Kansas or Missouri here today, into portions of Oklahoma, into Texas. It's just going to be hot, so make sure to stay hydrated out there. I cannot stress that enough. Then as we go into Thursday, the heat begins to expand more into the Midwest. We're up into the mid-90s here through the Illinois Valley, 103 in St. Louis, 102 in Kansas City there. And then by Friday, the heat remains the same across those areas from the Central Plains to the Ohio Valley with stifling highs into the middle 90s to low 100s. And then we see a little bit of some cooler weather moving in over top of that across the northern plains, especially North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan. That's with a little bit of some more thunderstorm activity moving over top of that ridge on Friday, holding temperatures down into the 70s and 80s. And speaking of those thunderstorm chances, the Storm Prediction Center has broad brushed a marginal risk of severe storms across this region on Thursday from portions of northern lower Michigan, the UP of Michigan up near the Marquette region, and then back through the Twin Cities here, Des Moines, Iowa, and then all the way back even into Wyoming, North Platte, Rapid City, Sioux Falls. Those will be the areas of concern on Thursday. There could be an upgrade to a slight risk as we get closer, something to keep an eye on. There is also a slight risk of severe weather across the Northeast on Thursday, so make sure to stay tuned for that as well. And just looking at the Cape values, Thursday afternoon, peak daytime heating up here in the Midwest, we're seeing values in excess of 2,000 joules per kilogram. Same thing over here into the Northeast. So we have lots of energy all around on Thursday. And looking at the timing of the precipitation, Thursday afternoon, a couple clusters of showers and storms, very loosely organized here across the Midwest from the Twin Cities region down into the mid-Mississippi Valley, and then a couple more clusters of showers and storms getting together across the Northeast here from Boston, New York City, back toward Pittsburgh. We'll have to watch for severe weather Thursday afternoon. And then much of the same as we go into Thursday night with just more of these clusters of severe thunderstorms developing over the top of that ridge with the active jet stream over the top and flattening out as we get through late this week. Then on Friday, I think Friday is a more substantial day of severe weather, at least has the potential to be. The Storm Prediction Center has the slight risk. That's a level 2 out of 5 on the scale, already 2 days out from Sioux Falls here into South Dakota all the way through Des Moines, getting through Waterloo, Iowa, southern Wisconsin, including Milwaukee there, Madison, down into Rockford, Illinois, Chicago, and into Gary, Indiana. Those are the areas at highest concern so far for severe weather in the yellow shaded color, but even in the dark green surrounding that into parts of the upper Midwest and the Ohio Valley, Detroit, Columbus, back to Indianapolis, Springfield, Illinois, we still have the chance for isolated severe storms through the day on Friday. And I actually do think this could get upgraded to an enhanced risk as we get closer with what I'm seeing, because look at these Cape values Friday afternoon. We are in excess of 3,000, if not 4,000 joules per kilogram across southern Minnesota, central Iowa, getting into Illinois and through the Ohio Valley on Friday. So even more instability than we even have today. And so Friday afternoon, we could have an MCS ongoing up here into the Arrowhead of Minnesota or northwest Wisconsin. That could cause some isolated damaging wind gusts, a couple clusters of storms here and there across the Ohio Valley, isolated strong to severe storms there Friday afternoon. But the main area of concern is an MCS that'll originate up here near the Twin Cities region and then drop east-southeast bound through the western Great Lakes region Friday night, posing the risk for possibly more widespread damaging winds. Also, some large hail and a few tornadoes cannot be ruled out, especially if we see some storms developing out ahead of the main line Friday night. But looking overall at the rainfall accumulation now through your early weekend on Saturday morning, decent rains can be expected, really centered across the central Great Lakes. So the Detroit area, you're the big winners there with about 2.5 inches of rain expected over the next couple of days. Chicago getting a couple inches of rain, Milwaukee up to Green Bay, and then down here across the Pittsburgh region, we could be closing in on an inch of rain by the time we get through Saturday morning. We have some moisture across the Four Corners region with some monsoonal moisture. It's not a lot though. It's really just kind of hit and miss with 1/4 of an inch to up to 3/4 of an inch down here from Colorado, New Mexico into Arizona. But underneath the influence of that ridge, folks, it's going to be hot and it's going to be dry across the southern plains and the deep south as we go through this weekend. In fact, this weekend, we still have that ridge hanging on tough across the southern United States, the Gulf Coast here. We do start to see a little bit of a trough develop across southeast Canada And that will influence some below normal temperatures for New England, the Northeast, down here into the upper Great Lakes this weekend. And then that amplifies just a little bit more early next week with the ridge. So some of the heat comes back across the Great Plains, even more intense next week. But then it starts to cool off across the Northeast into the eastern Great Lakes with that trough in southeastern Canada early next week. We're talking Monday, the 31st of July, or Tuesday, August 1st here as well, and probably even into the middle of next week as well. So let's take a look at some of those temperatures. High temperatures on Saturday, the 29th here this weekend. You can see into the low 100s we go yet again. The name of the game across the central and southern plains. A lot of the 90s down here into the southeast. It's back to 111 in Phoenix, back to 115, 120 into Death Valley. So much of the same we've been seeing, but you see the cooler air over the top here with that trough in southeast Canada developing. We have more of those upper 70s to low 80s across the northeast, the Great Lakes, into the upper Midwest on Saturday. And then as we go into early next week, we begin to start to heat up again more intensely into the Midwest, but we stay cool into the Northeast. So a big heat wave does continue to prevail through the end of July on Monday, July 31st, and likely taking us into early August. And just looking at that into early August, the EPS ensemble guidance is very bullish in putting these temperature anomalies 4, 6, 8 degrees Celsius here higher than climatology. So we're seeing a pretty big heat wave here as well for the Pacific Northwest, seeing above normal temperatures. The only game in town for cooler than normal temperatures will be Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, especially upstate New York, getting into Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and parts of New Jersey. And that's it as we go into early August. So that's the area with the cooler temperatures. But looking at the precipitation now, so going into early August, underneath that ridge, forget about the rain in the southeast, forget about the rain in the southern plains and parts of the mid-Atlantic. It's just not going to happen. The main area of focus will be with the active westerlies in the jet stream up here into the northern plains and Midwest. That will enhance the precipitation and thus the severe weather over the top, because you can imagine another deep reservoir of instability will be building into the central plains, and then we'll have more MCSs originating from the Dakotas, and then they'll drop southeast through the Illinois Valley into the western Ohio Valley into that first full week there into early August. So my severe weather forecast for that first full week in early August, I think it's possible we have some severe weather events from the Dakotas, especially South Dakota, and then southeastward as we go into the Ohio Valley and perhaps as far south as Tennessee as we get through that time frame. So big cities of Chicago, Milwaukee, Des Moines, Indianapolis, here, Lexington, Kentucky, Louisville, Nashville, perhaps we could start to see more severe weather as we go through that first week in August. Turning to the full tropical weather update, there's another area of investigation out here in the North Atlantic from the National Hurricane Center, giving this a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days, just to the north and east of the Lesser Antilles here. And seeing this right now, it's a pretty disorganized wave of convection here west of Africa, but we're continuing to monitor this as it presses off to the north and west here. Just looking at some of the ensemble members for pressure centers here, this kind of clusters up where they think the track of this low pressure will be going here once it develops. By Friday, July 28th, late this week, we see some of the members clustering up a low pressure system somewhere down here well to the east of the Lesser Antilles. This is what is known as the MDR, the main development region. And then as this moves to the northwest early next week, by the end of July on Monday the 31st, that pushes it further to the north of the Lesser Antilles, puts less of a risk for the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and more of a risk for the Bahamas perhaps, or even the Bermuda regions as well as we go towards next week. And then looking at the GEFS ensemble guidance, this is the American model ensembles, and you can see the same thing is implied here. On Friday, we start to cluster up the low pressure track, and then it moves it towards portions of the western Atlantic, mainly over the open waters. A couple ensembles get real close there to the northern Lesser Antilles regions, but I think most of it will be generally to the north. So this is basically a fish storm as we go into early next week with what I see see right now. But generally looking at this even further, the wind shear as we go into early next week does start to loosen up a bit. So as we have strong wind shear with the first system that was trying to get into the Caribbean earlier on this week, that shut that off here, even though we had sea surface temperatures well off the charts. Well, the shear starts to drop off. It's still there, but it's not as strong. So this has a little bit more of a fighting chance across the Western Atlantic as we go into early August here, and especially so when you look at the sea surface temperatures here, 29, 30, 31 degrees plus Celsius, folks. That's well into the 80s, if not the low 90s at least, with those sea surface temperatures. So it's very warm out here. So any system that has a little bit of shear or no shear will take full advantage of these water temperatures. I promise you that. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this. It's not a panic mode at any for any certain reason right now. We'll just keep an eye on that system. And then as we go into the Eastern Pacific, we have another 20% chance of development just off the coast of Mexico, where we've seen a lot of the systems lately here. The EPS ensemble members push that tropical wave across the Central Americas, perhaps into far southern Mexico by late this weekend on Sunday, and then off into the open waters of the Eastern Pacific near the coast or just off the coast there on the middle of next week by Wednesday, August 2nd. And a lot of those are kind of clustering up there to the south of the Baja of California as well. And looking at that as well, the middle of next week, at first it won't have a lot of shear, but as it continues to press west or northwestward, it's going to be encountering some cooler waters, first of all, but also some stronger, more significant shear to the west of the Baja as we go toward later next week, which would move it in towards that August 3rd, 4th, and 5th timeframe. So we'll keep an eye on this in the Eastern Pacific for Mexico, the Baja up here, as well as the Eastern Pacific as well. But, looking at the sea surface temperatures here, there's no reason to believe this system won't develop, especially if it has low shear or no shear as well, because of the sea surface temperatures well into the 80s to low 90s here as well across the Eastern Pacific. Well, make sure if you like these detailed weather breakdowns that you hit the subscribe button down below. I cover all of North America, including southern Canada, the United States, and the tropics here the most. And also be sure to press the thumbs up button down below the video. It helps out more than you know to get this weather information to more and more people across the platform. If you want to follow me on Twitter at hweather420 for additional weather forecast updates, make sure you do so down below in the description. I do update on that platform fairly frequently. Also, share this video on social media to get the word out about all this accurate weather information I'm giving you as well, and I appreciate it, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their Wednesday.